If your cucumber vines are still green, but the harvest has almost stopped, then the problem is probably not the weather. Most people think that by the second half of summer, cucumbers are simply getting old, and there is nothing left to do. I used to think the same way until I noticed that my neighbor was still picking buckets of fresh cucumbers while my plants were giving me only a few tired fruits every week. That was the moment I realized that the biggest mistake happens not in spring when we plant them, but much later when the plants quietly begin asking for a different kind of care, and we never notice it. Since then, I have been using a few simple habits that cost almost nothing, and every year my cucumbers keep producing much longer than they used to. I am not talking about expensive fertilizers or complicated methods, because I have never liked making gardening harder than it needs to be. I am talking about small things that anyone can do with a watering can, a pair of scissors, and a little attention. Many years ago, an older gardener showed me something that completely changed the way I looked at cucumber plants. He smiled and said that most people stop helping the plant exactly when it needs help the most. At that time, I did not fully understand what he meant, but after trying his advice with my own hands, I finally saw the difference. The vines stayed healthier, the leaves remained greener, and the new flowers kept appearing long after many other gardens had almost finished producing. That old method has stayed with me ever since because it works without costing extra money and without taking much time. There is one mistake that almost everyone makes during warm summer evenings, and it slowly steals the strength from the plants day after day without anyone noticing. I made that same mistake for years, and I blamed poor seeds, bad weather, and even the soil, before I understood what was really happening. Once I corrected that one habit, everything began to change, and the next step is even more important, because it tells the plant to keep growing, instead of preparing to stop for the season. By the middle of summer, I never rushed to feed my cucumbers first, because before adding anything, I always walk slowly along every row and simply look at the plants. This habit takes only a few minutes, but it often saves the harvest. Many people notice only the fruits while forgetting to look at the leaves and the stems. The plant always gives small signs before the harvest begins to fall. The lower leaves start turning yellow. Some leaves become thick and rough while others lose their bright green color. Many people think this is normal because summer is moving on, but I learned that this is exactly the moment when the plant needs help. If you wait another week, the vines become weaker and it becomes much harder to bring them back. An old gardener showed me something many years ago that I still do every season. He told me never to be afraid of removing old leaves that no longer help the plant. At first, I thought I would only make things worse because more leaves seemed better than fewer. Then he explained that tired leaves continue taking food and moisture while giving almost nothing in return. I tried removing only a few of the oldest yellow leaves close to the ground, and after several days I noticed something interesting. The middle part of the vine looked fresher and new flowers began appearing again. Since then, I never remove too many leaves at once because that is another mistake people often make. I only remove the oldest ones every few days and let the plant recover naturally. This simple method costs nothing and takes less time than watering one bed. Another thing that many gardeners forget is harvesting every cucumber that has reached a good size. Sometimes we leave one or two large fruits because we think we will pick them tomorrow or the day after. I used to do exactly that until I learned what happens inside the plant. As soon as cucumbers become too large, the plant thinks its job is already done and slowly reduces the growth of new fruits. Since I started harvesting regularly, every couple of days, I noticed that new cucumbers appear much faster. It almost feels as if the plant understands that there is still work to do. Most people never connect these two simple habits, but together they make a surprising difference. There is still another old method that almost nobody uses today, and it has helped me keep healthy vines even when the days become cooler and the nights begin changing at the end of summer. There is one forgotten habit that has helped me more than any expensive product I have ever seen in a gardening store, and it begins with ordinary watering. For many years, I watered my cucumbers the same way from the beginning of summer until autumn, because I believed that more water always meant more harvest. Then, one dry season, I noticed that although the soil looked wet, the plants were becoming weaker every week. That was when an older man from our village smiled and asked me a simple question. He asked whether I was watering the soil or only making myself feel better. I thought about those words for a long time because they sounded strange at first. Then he showed me what he meant. He watered less often, but much more carefully. He made sure the water soaked deeply into the ground instead of only wetting the surface. After that, he lightly loosened the top layer of soil the next day so that air could reach the roots. I copied this method, and after a short time the difference became easy to see. The leaves stayed firm even during hot afternoons, and the vines continued growing instead of looking tired. Very few people do this today because everyone wants quick results, but healthy roots always repay the extra few minutes. There is another small secret that I never ignore once the second half of summer arrives. I always spread a fresh layer of mulch around the plants even if there is already some old mulch on the bed. It can be dry grass without seeds, straw, or any clean organic material that is easy to find. This simple layer helps the soil stay cool during the day and keeps moisture inside much longer. It also protects the roots from sudden temperature changes that become more common toward the end of summer. Many gardeners think this is only useful in spring, but I have found that late summer is when mulch becomes even more valuable. I also stop pouring water directly onto the leaves because wet leaves during cooler evenings often become the beginning of unnecessary problems. I always water near the roots, and I try to do it either early in the morning or before sunset, while there is still enough warmth for the plants to dry naturally. Most people overlook these details because they seem too simple to matter, but simple habits repeated every week often give the biggest harvest. There is still one more old method that I use every single year, and when I first tried it, I honestly did not expect it to extend fruiting as much as it did. One more thing changed my harvest more than I expected, and it has nothing to do with buying new seeds or adding stronger fertilizers. It is something that many older gardeners used for years, but today, very few people even talk about it. During the second half of summer, I began giving my cucumber plants much lighter feeding than I did at the beginning of the season. Earlier, I believed that if a little fertilizer was good, then a little more had to be even better. That turned out to be a mistake. The plants grew many large leaves, but the number of fresh cucumbers slowly became smaller. It looked beautiful from a distance, but the baskets stayed half empty. That was when I understood that a healthy-looking plant is not always a productive one. An experienced gardener explained to me that later in the season the plant needs support for fruiting instead of pushing out endless new leaves. Since then, I have always been careful not to overfeed the vines. I prefer simple natural solutions that are inexpensive and easy to prepare. Sometimes I use well-diluted wood ash infusion if I know the soil needs it, or I choose another gentle feeding that has worked well in my garden for years. I never rush and I never feed dry soil because that can only stress the roots. First, I water the plants, and only then do I add any feeding. This small habit has saved me from many disappointments. Another thing that most people forget is tying and guiding the vines. As the season goes on, the stems become longer, heavier, and often lie on the ground. When that happens, the leaves stay damp longer after watering or rain, and the air moves poorly around the plant. I always lift the vines carefully and guide them so they have more space and light. I never pull hard because older stems break easily. Even a small adjustment can improve the condition of the whole plant. Many people are surprised that such a simple job can affect the harvest, but after trying it, they often notice healthier leaves and more flowers. There is also one habit that I never skip after picking cucumbers. I spend just a minute looking closely at the stems and leaves. If I notice a damaged leaf or a part that looks weak, I deal with it right away instead of waiting another week. Most gardeners postpone this until the weekend, and by then the problem is often much larger. These few quiet minutes in the garden have become one of the most valuable parts of my routine because they help me notice small changes before they become serious. And there is one final method that brings all these simple habits together and helps me keep harvesting cucumbers almost until the first real cold nights arrive. There is one habit that I never skip once August begins, because this is the time when many gardeners quietly accept that the season is almost over. I used to think the same way until I realized that cucumber plants often stop producing, not because they are too old, but because we stop encouraging them to grow. That sounds simple, but after many seasons, I became convinced that small, regular care always gives better results than trying to save the plants at the last moment. Every few days, I walk through the garden with a small basket. I pick every cucumber that has reached a good size. I remove any damaged fruit without hesitation. I check the vines for dry leaves, and I make sure the stems are not twisted or pressed against each other. This whole routine rarely takes more than 15 minutes, but the plants respond as if they have received much more attention. Many people wait until the weekend because they are busy during the week. I understand that because life is full of work and responsibilities. But I have noticed that short and regular visits help much more than one long afternoon spent in the garden. Another forgotten method that an older gardener showed me years ago is to keep the soil calm instead of constantly disturbing it. Some people dig deeply around the cucumber roots every week because they want the ground to look loose and clean. I learned to avoid that. The roots stay close to the surface and they can be damaged much more easily than we think. Now, I only loosen the very top layer when necessary, and I do it gently. The plants seem to appreciate that quiet treatment. I also pay attention to the weather forecast more than I used to. When cooler nights are expected, I make sure the soil has enough moisture before the temperature drops because dry plants become stressed much faster. If I know several cool nights are coming, I prepare a simple covering material in advance instead of searching for it after the cold has already arrived. Most people remember protection only after the leaves begin suffering. By then, some of the harvest has already been lost. These are not expensive tricks, and they do not require special equipment. They are simply careful habits that become part of the weekly routine. The interesting thing is that every one of these small actions may seem almost unimportant on its own, but together they help the plant stay strong much longer. There is still one final lesson that completely changed the way I look at cucumber growing, and it is probably the easiest one of them. As the season slowly moves toward autumn, I stop thinking about getting one huge harvest and begin thinking about keeping the plants healthy for as many weeks as possible. That small change in attitude has probably helped me more than any single trick. Many gardeners become disappointed when they see fewer cucumbers than they picked in July and they almost stop caring for the vines. I used to do exactly the same thing. Then I realized that even if each plant gives only a few cucumbers every several days, they still add up to a very respectable harvest by the time the first cold weather arrives. Those extra weeks often provide enough fresh cucumbers for the table, and sometimes even for another batch of homemade pickles. That is why I never give up on the plants too early. I continue watering carefully. I continue harvesting on time. I continue removing old leaves little by little, and I never assume that the season is already finished. Many people overlook another simple detail. They leave damaged or overgrown cucumbers hanging on the vine because they think they are not worth picking. I always remove them. Every fruit that stays too long takes strength away from the plant. Once I understood this, I stopped feeling sorry for throwing away poor quality cucumbers because saving the whole plant became much more important than saving one fruit. Another old gardener once told me that a cucumber plant should never be forced to carry unnecessary weight. Those words stayed with me, and every year they proved themselves true. I also try to spend a few quiet minutes in the garden without rushing. Sometimes I notice the first new flower that I would have missed before. Sometimes I see that a vine needs a little support, or that the mulch has become too thin after heavy rain. These are tiny details, but together they keep the plants comfortable and growing. Very few people make time for simple observation because everyone wants quick solutions. In my experience, the garden rewards patience much more than speed. After all these years, I have become convinced that there is no single miracle method that keeps cucumbers producing until the first cold nights. The real secret is that several easy habits work together. None of them cost much money. None of them require expensive equipment. They simply help the plant stay healthy long enough to keep doing what it naturally wants to do. And before I finish, there's one final thought that completely changed the way I enjoy every gardening season, because it has very little to do with cucumbers themselves and everything to do with the person who grows them. After many years in the garden, I have come to one simple conclusion that I wish someone had told me much earlier. Good cucumber harvests are rarely the result of one miracle product or one secret ingredient. They are almost always the result of several small habits repeated calmly throughout the season. That is why I no longer chase complicated advice or spend money on things that promise impossible results. I trust what I have seen with my own eyes over many summers. I pay attention to the plants every few days. I harvest on time. I remove tired leaves carefully. I keep the soil evenly moist. I avoid overfeeding. I protect the roots from sudden changes in temperature, and I never assume that the season is already over just because the calendar says it is the second half of summer. Every one of these small actions helps the next one work even better. That is the old forgotten method in its simplest form. Instead of looking for one powerful solution, I help the plant a little at every stage. The reward comes slowly, but it comes steadily. There is something very satisfying about walking into the garden on a cool morning near the end of the season, and still finding fresh cucumbers hanging under healthy green leaves while many other beds have already stopped producing. It reminds me that patience often gives better results than rushing. It also reminds me that gardening does not have to be expensive to be successful. Most of the things I shared with you today cost almost nothing because they are based on observation instead of spending money. That is one reason I still enjoy growing cucumbers after so many years. Every season teaches something new while proving that the old simple methods still deserve respect. If even one of these ideas helps you keep your cucumber plants producing a little longer, then I will be very glad, because nothing is more pleasant than bringing home another basket of fresh cucumbers when you thought the season was already ending. I hope you will try these simple habits one by one, instead of changing everything at once, because that is the easiest way to see what works best in your own garden. I wish you healthy plants, generous harvests, and many peaceful mornings in your garden, because I believe those quiet moments are just as valuable as the cucumbers themselves.